Let's now summarize what we've learned in Module 3. Summary: Mule applications. Anypoint Studio can be used to build Mule applications for integration and API implementations. Studio provides us two-way editing from graphical and XML views, an embedded Mule runtime for testing applications. We learned that Mule applications can accept and process messages through a series of message processors that are plugged together in a flow. We learned a bit about Mule messages and how they have inbound properties, outbound properties, a payload, and attachments. We got to see message processors, ones that include connectors, scopes, components, transformers, filters, flow control, and error handling. We dove a little bit more into the building blocks that make up the applications, connectors in the context of inbound and outbound, how connectors can be endpoint or operation-based. We talked about when you drag out a connector, how an endpoint is created in a flow. We talked about most endpoints having a common configuration that can be encapsulated in a separate reusable global element. We saw the use of a HTTP listener as an inbound endpoint to trigger a flow, and also the ability to use HTTP in the context of a request. We saw the set payload transformer that allowed us to write to a payload to potentially respond to a client or send for other processing. We used a database connector to connect to a JDBC compliant database. We used DataWeave and the transform message component to transform messages from one data type to a specific structure that we wanted. And we also saw API design to implementation. We saw how to create RESTful interfaces for applications, to manually create flows with listeners for each resource or method pairing, or to go in automatically in Anypoint Studio and generate that skeleton, that scaffolding with API Kit. We saw how to connect web service interfaces to implementations using flow references that allow us to pass messages from one flow to another, and how seamless the API design to implementation experience can be, how we can create a project with API components from a YAML file directly off the platform, and how we can use API sync to pull, push, and compare between the version of the YAML we have in Studio versus that that's on the platform.